Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you on Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Victor Grossman. Victor is an American publicist and author. In 1952, while serving in the US military in Austria, he defected to the Soviet Union by swimming across the Danube River. After defecting, Victor studied journalism in East Germany and remained there working as a journalist and writer. He still resides in Germany, I understand. Thank you so much for joining me today, Victor.
Yes, but I have to make a little correction.
Please do.
I was serving in Germany, in West Germany. I went to Austria from the American to the Soviet zone, but not to the Soviet Union. I just went into Austria and they sent me to East Germany. There was never a question of the Soviet Union.
So really it should be the Warsaw Pact and not the East.
That's right. It was west to east, whatever way you look at it, right. West to east.
Now, I understand, Victor, that before you began serving in the U.S. military and defected to to Germany, East Germany, you studied at Harvard University, and that while studying there, you joined the Communist Party of the United States. And I also understand that part of the reason you defected in 1952 is that you feared prosecution by U.S. authorities for not having declared your membership in the Communist Party prior to entering the army. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. There was a law at the time which said that every member of not only the Communist Party, but of a whole long list of left-wing organizations had to register immediately with the police as a foreign agent. For not doing so, you could be sentenced to up to $10,000 and 5 years in prison for every day you didn't register. And of course, nobody registered under this nonsense, which was later ruled unconstitutional. But because I hadn't registered when I got drafted into the army during the Korean War, I was afraid to admit not only a whole bunch of left-wing organizations I had been in from time to time, youth organization, etc. Mm-hmm. And so I was afraid, and therefore I signed that I hadn't been and hoped that they wouldn't check, but they did.
So today, this foreign agent nonsense sounds quite familiar, as a matter of fact, because of the current political climate we find ourselves in. You effectively defected in what I understand is the height of the McCarthyism era and the Red Scare, which began in the late 40s and continued into the 1950s. And my question to you, Victor, is, today I've been using the phrase McCarthyism to describe the attitude of Western governments towards people who dissent from Western foreign policy. And it may not be as severe, maybe in some ways it's worse than what you experienced at the time you defected. But certainly today there is a lot of finger pointing going on at people who criticize, for example, the West's policies in Ukraine or the West's policies with respect to China and so forth. So my question to you is, do you see parallels today in the public discourse between the era of McCarthyism that you lived through as a young man and the kind of dialogue we hear nowadays around critics of Western foreign policy?
Yes, there are many similarities, obviously. Evidently, as long as your opinions and your views are more or less okay and standard and fit in with the general line, you have complete freedom. And not only that, but as long as there's no tension, you can even extend. They seem to think up on top. Let these radicals have their little newspapers or their little programs. Nobody listens anyway. It doesn't matter. However, as soon as you start crossing the borders of this, as soon as you start really questioning basic questions and basic policies, that's when things start getting tough. They did it, by the way, already in 1945. The war had hardly been over when it started in the United States. And now we see it, by the way, in Germany and in Britain and in the United States, that if you disagree with certain basic policies, you can be in trouble, not now or rarely put in jail, although a fellow like Assange was also in jail for many years, but not usually in jail, but restricted in where you can get your stuff printed or where you can speak, so that basically you're kept to almost not quite silence, but to very a position where very few people can listen to you, and that's similar today.
I'm curious, more broadly, Victor, what was life like back then in the 1950s in East Germany? And how do you compare life then in East Germany to the conditions in Germany today?
Well, that's a long story. But when I got there in 1952, it was only 7 years after the war. So that things were still pretty tight, and they were much tighter in East Germany than West Germany. I had been there as a soldier for 9 months, so I could compare the two. West Germany was much bigger and much richer in everything from natural resources. It got assistance from the Marshall Plan from the USA. It had lots of ways of getting money, which East Germany did not have, because the Soviets, who were their sponsors, had been destroyed almost completely and had been wrecked in the war, so that they were really forced to pull themselves up by their own bootstrings. And so that when I got there, it was not as I had sort of almost imagined, hunger and people going hungry and ragged. No, there was enough food already, but it was, and this remained, there was always enough food in East Germany, but it was a question of variation and choice and assortment. And that was in those days pretty tight. All the staples almost all the staples were there. Once in a while, there's a shortage of this and that, but you could get enough to fill your stomach. Not only that, I should mention that every job and every school and every college was compulsory to give everybody working with them or studying there a good hot meal at lunchtime for a very, very low price, for almost nothing. And since that in Germany is the main meal of the day, the midday meal, it meant that you only had to worry about supper and breakfast. And there were always rolls and butter or margarine as you preferred and stuff like that. In the evening, bread, so that there was no hunger that I could see. But it was sparse for people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were refugees and had very little and were still struggling to get out. And of course, a lot of men were still prisoners at that time. Mm-hmm. However, life then, and as it continued, unlike what most people in the West believed and still believe, life was basically pretty normal. Mm-hmm. People went to work every week, their regular work day. It was first 48 hours, but then they dropped it later. They went to work. When they came home, in those early days, you listened to the radio. Now, of course, then later came television. On the weekends, you went to see a soccer match or a football match, or to the movies. If you were in a big city, as I later was, I was first in a small town for 2 years. But then I moved to the big city, Leipzig, where I went to college, and then to East Berlin. And there you had lots and lots and lots of theater. And I don't mean only movie theaters, but also stage theaters, opera, which is very popular over here. And so that there was plenty to do, and more people in not only East Germany, in Germany in general, they often have, aside from their home, and most people live in rented. They don't, not so many live in their own private homes. It's many more live in rented apartments, or flats. But those people often had a little bungalow, someplace, if possible, on a lake shore or in the woods or some pleasant place where they'd go for weekends and in the summer and get away from the city. And so that people in general grumble because there was always a shortage of some damn thing. There are always shortages. But the shortages there in the early years, there were shortages of things you really needed and wanted. But as the years went by, we started to get more and more refrigerators, and then later washing machines. And slower still at first, cars. It was always behind West Germany and all of these things, but it was catching up. It was catching up so that people were getting them. The main problem was housing, because so much had been wrecked in the war and because they had very little facilities. So that it took a while to get back into what they did finally get. But by 1971, a huge building campaign to build new modern homes, flats for everybody. Every family was supposed to get one. They never quite reached that goal, but they got close with about 2 million in this little country of about 16, 17 million. And once you got that, you were really pretty set. Until then, you lived as I did when I first arrived. I had just a room. I roomed with a family. They still heated with these coal ovens. You got briquettes of coal. You had to make a fire every morning and take the ashes down and get the new coals. I never really mastered that, but I was grateful after leaving this small town that I got to where we got regular heating.
Mm-hmm.
That's a few impressions.
Would you say that life, especially in the latter part of the time that you were in East Germany, when by the point in time at which the country had come to grips and found ways to cope with the ravages of the Second World War and all of the privation that caused, for example, the destruction of the housing stock and so forth. When East Germany had recovered at that point, do you think that life then was more economically secure for the average citizen of East Germany than it is today for the average citizen of Germany? Do you think that it was a more egalitarian society, or do you think it was less egalitarian and less secure than Germany is today?
Well, I would not only compare it with Germany today or with West Germany, but also with my home country, the United States. And which I always made this comparison because I'm an American and remained an American, by the way. I still am, and I'm an American citizen. But in some ways, as I mentioned, there was always a certain amount of grumbling and even anger, because the day you wanted to buy scissors, oh, didn't you know we haven't had scissors for 6 months now? But if it was something else, we wanted wine glass. Oh, wine glasses. Yeah. But first of all, you had all the food you wanted. Second of all, rent for your flat was never more than about 1/10 of your income. So that this has changed. Has changed greatly. So that rent was almost a negligible amount. Nobody had trouble paying their rent. And by the way, nobody could be thrown out of their apartment. That was forbidden. Nobody could be thrown out. Even if you didn't pay your rent for 2 years, they couldn't throw you out until at least they had another place for you to go, a cheaper one. So that nobody was on the streets, not a soul. In all those 40 years, I never saw one person sleeping in the streets or outdoors like that, or begging. No begging, because everybody had a job. It was secure. When I talked to my fellow workers, I worked in a factory for a while, and talked about possibility of losing a job. They laughed at me. We can't lose a job. First of all, we can't be fired. You have to have a union permission to get fired, and that's only if you hit your boss over the head with a crowbar, or if you come in every day for weeks dead drunk. Then they might throw you out, but only with union permission. And there were no layoffs, big layoffs. When they had, for example, there was a mine, they had to shut it down. There was no more coal down there. Mm-hmm. They didn't shut it down. For a year in advance, they made sure that everybody who lost a job in that mine, and this fitted other industries too, was able either to get a similar job elsewhere, or to retrain, but getting his old pay, or if he was almost old enough to retire. So that it meant that nobody was worried about that. Second of all, most important perhaps, after that, you paid a monthly tax. This is something like in Canada, but not like the USA. West Germany has it in a way too, though. You pay a monthly tax, and this tax in the GDR covered everything. What I mean is every visit to a doctor or a dentist you didn't pay a penny. You made an appointment, depending on how busy he was, or you had to wait longer or shorter, but usually not too long, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of days, maybe less, maybe more. But you didn't pay a penny. The medicine which he prescribed for whatever you had, you didn't pay a penny. You went into the pharmacy or the chemist in Canada, and you gave you a prescription, and they gave you the medicine. Not a penny changed hands, unless you wanted to get something extra, your cough drops or something. But what the doctor prescribed, this, when you went to the hospital, I was in the hospital with hepatitis for 9 weeks in a double room. 9 weeks long was a hell of a long time. But the good thing about it was I didn't pay a penny. And not only that, but when I was finished afterwards, I got a cure, they called it, for 4 weeks rehabilitation in a very beautiful estate. It had been taken away from the wealthy Siemens family. A beautiful estate, 4 weeks with all kinds of treatment, with mud baths and bubble baths and massages and everything for 4 weeks, full meals, full transportation, everything free. And I got 90% of my wages. And I got a year later, that was repeated to make sure that my liver was okay. This time in Czechoslovakia at Carlsbad, I got a similar 4-week cure. My wife had 3 such cures for her rheumatism. Mm-hmm. So that this was, add to that, under the same tax, child care was free. So that any woman who wanted to work, could she or her husband, if he wasn't too lazy, would take the child to a nursery after about a year. First she'd get paid off, she'd get maternity leave, paid, half a year. She could take another half year unpaid, but with her job guaranteed. And then she could take the child, she didn't have to, but she could if she wanted to keep working. She could take the child to child care. After 1 year to 6 years, he would be in a kindergarten or nursery and kindergarten, all for nothing. I think you paid a small amount for milk, that they get their morning milk, but otherwise free. Wow. Summer vacations for kids, free, usually at the seashore or a lake or in the mountains, free. Or almost free, I should say. There was a small charge, but it was a funny charge. It was 12 marks if you sent a child for 3 weeks. It was 12, which was almost nothing. It was nothing. A few hours pay. If you had 2 children, it rose not to 24, but to 18 marks. From 3 children or more, it was free completely. In other words, people were encouraged to have babies. At the same time, abortion was also free and without any problems or any criticism. I think as of 16 years with no questions asked. Except possible health complications.
Right.
But this was free. So that, and by the way, retirement was at age 60 for women and 65 for men. After that, you got your retirement pay, which varied according to what you had earned in your whole life. Mm-hmm. It could be more, it could be less, but it was enough to live on. And as a pensioner, there were still places where you could get a hot meal every lunchtime, so that nobody was hungry. And these were some of the good things. There were bad things, which you probably ask about, but those were some of the good things. As for West Germany today, or now all of Germany today, some of these things are also kept. You have to be insured with health, so that it isn't as like in the States where you're stuck for 30,000 or 10,000 for an operation or whatever. The operations is all free, or covered by this small tax, which was up to 60 marks a month maximum, or up to 1/10 of your pay, and no more. That was nothing serious. But today in Germany today, not West Germany, but it's all of Germany today, you still have this health insurance. which is a lucky thing, so that I'm not afraid of going to the doctor with without a lot of money in my wallet.
Mhm.
But you do now have to pay for eyeglasses a certain amount. They give you some, but part you have to pay yourself. To hearing aids, like I have, you get a certain amount is paid for by the insurance, but a part of it is not. Those cures are very much restricted. They don't have 4-week cures. Now there may be 3 weeks and only medical expenses covered. The other expenses for transportation and for food and lodging, you pay. And and child care, it varies from state to state in Germany. Sometimes it's also almost free now. It was it was improved by unification, because the women in West Germany, they said, look what they have in East Germany. We want it too. And so that they have now lots and lots of free kindergartens, but not all of them. And these are, and some of the other changes I should mention, but you do have now in Germany, in the big cities, you see lots of people sleeping in the streets. Nothing like what I saw in San Francisco or Los Angeles,
Right.
and nothing like that. But you see under the elevator bridge, under the bridge for the elevated train, there are usually 4 or 5
Mhm.
men, once a woman or two,
And rent,
sitting
I
there,
imagine, rent has become
sometimes begging.
right.
And when I took my wife to the United States for her first visit, she was shocked to see people sleeping in the streets. She saw one man in a big cardboard carton sleeping there. And then she saw these old ladies with a shopping cart from the supermarket with all their possessions in there. And then along the park, Central Park in New York, every second bench was occupied by a person without a roof over his head. She was shocked by this because we didn't know it. Everybody did not have some of the things they would like to have had, especially luxury goods were expensive, were more expensive. Staples, potatoes, apples, bread, meat, basic meat, the main meat shops. This was all kept to one single price for the whole country from starting in 1958 right through to the end. They never raised prices. Just as they never raised prices on transportation, the underground subway and the bus and the streetcar or tram, they were so dirt cheap that it was just not even worth it. It was 20 pfennigs. It was not it was nothing. And it stayed that way all through the years. Now it goes, every year it goes up and up and up with train rides to if you're going over the weekend. It was 8 pfennigs per kilometer, which was so little. Now it's got expensive again. For December, the price is going to rise again and again and again. So that and I should say, however, the main difference I see is that just a few days ago and today as well, the biggest major company, the most important company in Germany is VW, Volkswagen.
Yes.
They've just announced they're going to have to shut down maybe 4 of their main plants and throw those people, an awful lot of them, out of work. Some will be able to find jobs, but throw them out of work.
Victor, this brings me to my next question. Actually, I want you to comment on the VW announcement, which was devastating. But I'd like to give some context to this discussion. As I'm sure you know, as a result of the war in Ukraine, Germany and other European states imposed quite severe sanctions on Russia. And it didn't completely cut itself off from Russian gas, but made it much more difficult to access Russian gas. And that seemed to have been a very important foundation for the German industrial model for many years, up until the Ukraine war. And then we had this explosion at the Nord Stream pipeline. And as I'm sure you know, you are a journalist after all, and an American. Legendary reporter Seymour Hersh did an expose in
Yes.
which he, in meticulous detail, based upon his sources inside the US government, described how the Biden administration destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. And in fact, as again, I'm sure you know, Biden, before the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, said very clearly, while standing beside Olaf Scholz, that if Russia invaded Ukraine, they would bring an end to Nord Stream. And there were other statements made by other senior U.S. officials, which basically amounted to a confession to the crime before they committed it. But in any event, so now you have this situation where the Europeans, the governments of Europe, and particularly Germany, are running around scurrying, trying to find an alternate explanation for what happened to Nord Stream. And now the attention is focused on, some murky characters in Ukraine. So apparently Zelensky didn't know about it. This is the narrative we're being given now. My question to you is, what do you think the truth is about Nord Stream? And do you think your view is widely shared amongst Germans, or do you think your view, assuming you accept Seymour Hersh's account, is something that is still not widely accepted by the German people? And more broadly, what do you think a sensible policy from an economic perspective and from the perspective of the German people's security, their economic security, their military security, what do you think a sensible policy is towards Russia?
Well, that's about 3 or 4 questions in one.
Yes. Why don't we start with Nord Stream, and then we can talk more broadly about the German-Russian relationship.
First of all, when I read that by Seymour, when I heard about the explosion, it seemed so obvious who was behind it, because we didn't know yet about that statement by Biden, but we did know that the last 3 American ambassadors to Germany all insisted you shouldn't use that pipeline. You shouldn't open up that pipeline. They insisted, and there was lots of pressure, which was agreed to by some German manufacturers and economic interests, and others wanted to keep it. They were split on that. And then when the explosion came, of course, I had to laugh because it seemed so obvious who was behind it and who would profit from it. It meant that liquefied gas from the United States, from fracking in the United States, would be sent all across the ocean and to Germany to be turned back into gas and for energy. Mm-hmm. It seems so obvious. The interesting thing is that report by Seymour Hersh, with all the details, was absolutely silenced in the media here, except for very few left-wing media. They didn't even mention it. In fact, they didn't talk about the whole thing for months, until at first they did. They saying it must have been the Russians, but when it was clear it was not the Russians, then they started with this phony. There's some Polish yacht was supposed to be
right
nonsense, yeah. And so they kept very quiet. But when it began to come up again, they dug up this some Ukrainian. Nobody knows really who or why, but I think that an awful lot of people are skeptical. I don't spend a lot of time talking about that with people, but I think an awful lot of people are very skeptical. What it meant was that this cheap source of energy for Germany was cut off. And this has caused big economic problems because that gas coming in by ship from the United States or by ship from Qatar and from the Near East is much more expensive. And it means that they're forced to raise their prices in industry. And that means charge more. Or what else? It led to a big inflation in prices, which hit an awful lot of German people very hard in the pocketbook. In other words, lots of prices, especially groceries, but also heating homes, because at the same time, the Green Party here was insisting that people turn to forms of heating their home, which do not consume so much energy. But that means more expensive. Mm-hmm. And they've been fighting about that for a couple of years. and splitting the various parties in the government. There are three. They've been split up on that and about everything else.
Mhm.
But people were worried, and many people were really cut down so much in their income by this inflation in groceries, in heating, and in rent prices for their homes. So it went up and up and up. It's hurt a lot of people, and a lot of people who it hasn't yet hit so hard, they're worried because it's going up in many cases. They're talking about keeping it down, but who knows? That explains why the automobile and metal workers now want to go on a strike. They want a 7% increase in wages, and they need it. But of course, the companies don't want to give. They want to give them something 1 or 2% at most. So that this has really upset the economy in Germany to a great extent. Nobody knows yet what direction it will go, whether it will be a crash or just further inflation. However, this has proved important for the different parties, including the two parties which say we should not have broken gas lines or broken economic relations with Russia, because they've cut down on, not only on the gas line, but on all kinds of things. Since Ukraine, Russia has been punishing Ukraine, cutting off all, not all of them, but as many as they can of economic connections. Well, this is what used to be called cutting off your nose to spite your face. It seems that Russia has somehow pulled out of this and is perhaps even stronger economically with its new allies in this BRIC group, whereas Germany is really in a difficult situation and may get worse. And there's one part, as I said, there are two parties. One is a new party. It's a break off from the old left party, or Linke, it's called in German. And it has said that was a mistake. The whole Ukrainian war must be stopped as soon as possible with a ceasefire and negotiations, and we have to resume trade with Russia.
That's the part, Sarah Wagenknecht, if I'm...
Sarah Wagenknecht, the woman who leads this party and who basically dominates this party, because its party is in her name. It's called the Sarah Wagenknecht, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. I mean, Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance. But that's a main position that she has taken. Interestingly, so has the far right party, which has also said this was a big mistake. The interesting thing is the German economy, or the big companies, were in a way split. Some wanted to stress trade and economic exchange with America, U.S. and Canada, but especially America, and some with Russia and Asia. There's two different directions. For example, the car manufacturers, they like to sell cars to Russia and to China. It meant an awful lot to them. They didn't sell so many in the U.S. They wanted to sell their machinery. They wanted to sell fruit and vegetables to Russia, and to get this cheap energy from Russia. This has been cut very short, if not completely, whereas American trade is threatening to get much more expensive. If Trump wins and starts putting tariffs on imports, that will really hurt German industry. So that you have this split up, and you have this one party which was, as I say, a split off from an old left party, but it says immediate ceasefire and a rebirth of trade with Asia, and this part of the world, not across the Atlantic. And it won. In fact, both parties, the left one and the right one, both were the only parties to win lots of new votes in recent elections in three of the states, which are East German states. So I'll let you break in with it.
So is it fair to say that you support the reestablishment of economic ties with Russia and some sort of diplomatic initiative to bring to an end the war in Ukraine and restore peace in Europe and good neighborly relations amongst all these states? Is that your preferred approach to relations with Russia?
My approach is that all wars and all conflicts should be stopped as soon as possible, wherever they are. And since the two main, well, there are several going on that are pretty terrible that you don't read so much about in Sudan and in other places, but the two main ones are in the Ukraine and, of course, in the Near East. And for the Ukraine, absolutely, there's lots of arguments among left-wing people here who defend Putin and others who condemn Putin, as the media does completely. The media is all, not only that, they've made Putin into a regular a devil. The pictures almost have horns and a long tail with him. It's been like with Hitler or with Stalin or Hitler or Fidel or whoever the United States is against at the time, they make its leader into a terrible devil. Actually, by reading his speeches, I find that Putin has called for what they call multipolarity, that the whole economy of the world should not be based on one main leading country, meaning the United States, nor China, but it should be on all the countries at peace and trading with each other. This is the goal which I look towards. That the first thing is stop the killing, stop the destruction, both in the Ukraine and even worse, so terribly, terribly worse in Gaza and now in Lebanon, to end that fighting and to fight in every way, to fight, to demonstrate, to march, to say, get together, argue all you want, but stop fighting and find some agreement. And then move towards a world system where the countries are not against each other, fighting, rivaling each other, and trying to get to break the other one's back economically, but to each one to improve itself by helping the others, by exchange. Actually, the original idea of trade, of common trade. You give me what you have enough of, and I'll give you in back what I have more than enough of, and we should get along. And that's the goal I think we should be working for.
So you mentioned, these horrible wars happening in West Asia, as you refer to the Near East. The Biden administration, of course, has been front and center in arming both Ukraine and Israel throughout these wars, and of adopting policies, at least in terms of the rhetoric may be de-escalatory, the rhetoric that Biden employs. But when you look at the actions of the Biden administration, they seem designed to exacerbate the situation and prolong these wars. And then on the other hand, you have Donald Trump in the upcoming election. We're now, about a week away from what could be quite an extraordinary election. And Donald Trump doesn't seem to be a man of peace either. In fact, in some respects, his language is extremely belligerent, more so to China than to Russia. To Russia, he's talking about bringing the Ukraine war to an end, which is a good thing if he's serious. But his language towards Russia and towards, Israel's adversaries in West Asia, in particular Iran, is quite belligerent. So basically, what you have is the classic two evils. You have to choose between two evils. And you wrote a book called Crossing the River. And in that book, I understand you wrote, quote, "If people always choose the lesser of two evils, evil will always be with us," close quote. I myself passionately agree with that observation, and you said it much more eloquently than I could. I wonder, because I think it's been years since you wrote that book, do you still ascribe to that view? And if you do ascribe to that view, what is your advice to the voters of the United States as they confront the two evils?
Well, first of all, I should mention that I mentioned that in my book because when I was a kid, I was always interested in politics. And I asked a Dell friend, a very fine fellow that was very nice to me and friendly with me. He's a puppet maker, puppet player. I asked him about that, about shouldn't we be voting for the lesser evil? And he said that. He said, if you always vote for the lesser evil, you'll always have evil. This has been a big problem for me because, as I say, I'm still a citizen with a vote in the state of New York, where it doesn't really matter because it always goes Democrat. But still, trying to decide has been difficult because, on the one hand, Trump, first of all, I don't think he knows anything about foreign policy at all. I don't think he knows one country from the other. He's mostly interested in another big Trump Tower with his name in gold letters in as many countries as possible. That's his main interest, I think.
That does seem to be the case, yes. Yes.
At the same time, and I think he hoped to have one in Moscow, and that may explain some of his ties with Putin.
Right.
But it did seem as if, in his ignorance, he did seem to want to work towards peace with Russia and with North Korea, and even to a degree with China. And at the same time, his policies in the first of all, he's taken opposite policies too. He supported Netanyahu in Israel, who I have no respect for. I can't stand anything he does because I've seen tens of thousands of people killed on his orders, and he helped him, and so that I couldn't trust Trump on that. Especially, I think that Trump may even have some good impulses, but he's always had bad advisors on foreign policy. Perhaps that was it. It's hard to look into his head. Mm-hmm. It's hard, but maybe not too much in there to find. But now he's taken such terrible stance on racism. Just on Sunday, racism of every kind against blacks, against Latinos, against the poor, against immigrants, whatever they are, and on opponents of his political views, who he's ready to put them all in jail, or if that doesn't work, to shoot them down and get the cops, and if not the cops, then the National Guard, and if that doesn't work, get the army against them. It's frightening. At the same time, Harris and Biden, although Biden was in some ways, it was many ways better than Trump, he still was very disappointing in terms of ecology, drilling in the Arctic and other places, in terms of labor laws. The good ones didn't get passed. He appointed some good people, but he didn't get the good laws passed, even when it was possible. And worst of all, basically those 2,000-pound bombs which have been hitting in Gaza and destroying whole apartment houses, even with children and old ladies and everything else in them, and destroying the whole city, even the sidewalks they've torn up, and the complete fuel and water and sewage has been ripped apart, and the clinics and the schools and the mosques, everything ruined, destroyed. Of course, it's always the explanation is always the terrible events of October 7th last year. And of course, they were terrible, but they say 1,400 or 1,200 were killed there. It turns out that a certain number of them were actually Arabs, not Jews. And it also turns out that some of them were killed because the Israeli tanks and helicopters fired on them to prevent any hostages being taken. That's all rather unclear, but it was a horrible event, and a lot of people got hurt and killed, and in a bad way. But that that when you weigh that 1,000 or 1,200 against 40, 50, in Britain they say it may be as many as 100,000 killed of men, women, and children. And you see the pictures of these children maimed and losing their feet and losing, it's just so terrible. And Biden has been supplying, or Biden's government has been supplying these 1,000, 2,000-pound bombs, which don't distinguish between a Hamas fighter and an old lady in a bed who can't be moved, or a little child.
Doesn't this all militate for a vote for Jill Stein?
Do I hope? Well,
all of the arguments you've articulated.
Biden said his statements have always been Israel should go easy with it, which should maintain a certain civilization. Mm-hmm. They've been stopping all food and fuel there. And then he said he'll give them 30 days. Well, this was so obviously, it was a joke. 30 days meant after the election. He didn't want to change before the election. It was so obvious that it was planned to be after the election that I found it hard to vote, to be able to vote for Biden, for Harris. At the same time, that business with the lesser evil, you can't do away with it completely. You can't forget it completely. There are times when you really have to choose a lesser evil. And I've been fighting with the question, the fact that if Trump wins next week, it is really possible that when he gets into power, he tries to establish a dictatorship, which is brutal, racist, restrictive in every way, which would not, and Biden would not be the same. As far as foreign policy, one is as bad as the other, I believe. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's very important. We live in Europe. Those bombs, when they're fired from the American base, now in Germany, illegally, by the way, but it's permitted. Mm-hmm. If they fire a bomb into Russia, the one be coming right back and it'll be hitting in Germany. Mm-hmm. It'll be Europe which suffers more than the United. But of course, it could happen that the United States would get hit too, if an atomic war. And that's what my big fear is, that this fight in Ukraine, it just takes a mistake, a plane which goes across the border by mistake. Somebody pulls the false button. Somebody makes the wrong message. It almost happened in 1962 with Cuba, that they thought that the Americans were getting ready to hit, and the Soviets were ready to hit back. And one officer said, no, let's wait. Maybe that's a false alarm, which it was. And they stopped it. The same thing happened during maneuvers in Europe. One person, it was a spy within the NATO. He said, these maneuvers, atomic maneuvers, which the East was afraid of, they are not planning, as you fear, to use them to attack. It's really just maneuvers. It's stopped, but who knows if there's going to be such a lucky break the next time.
Right.
If Zelensky gets weapons which he can fire all the way into Russia, all the way into Moscow, to break into the bunkers under Moscow, it's obvious that Russia is going to fight back, and they won't do it gently. Mm-hmm. And this fear is what bothers me more than anything else. And any hope to end that fighting in Ukraine is worth marching for, demonstrating for. There have been demonstrations here and in Britain, and in other countries, and in the United States, and in Canada, but they're not big enough yet.
Right. I believe, Victor, that I suspect you would more or less agree with this, that our highest priority should be to end those wars. That is the most
talk a little louder.
That the highest priority we ought to have at this particular moment is ending those wars. There's nothing as important as that right now, primarily because of the potential for a nuclear holocaust, but also because so many people are dying unnecessarily, so many innocents in such horrible ways. But nonetheless, going back to that wonderful statement from your book, Crossing the River, I was hoping that you were going to come to the conclusion that the sensible thing to do is to vote for Jill Stein. So, because she ain't evil and she will put a stop to wars.
I felt that way too. Or Cornel West, who I love his speech making. He's a great, and he says good things.
Yes.
So there was for a while I was considering Cornel West or Jill Stein, both of them good people whom I respect highly. and approve of in general in their positions. At the
Right.
same time, I was at a conference 2 weeks ago with people from different countries, also from the USA, but they attacked me, boy, for saying that, because as they say, those could really be just the few thousand votes in Wisconsin or in Pennsylvania or in Georgia, which make a difference, and let Trump win. And if Trump wins, we will not have we will not. It will be so much more difficult to demonstrate against the war. That screws could be tightened so tough that every organization will be really cut down.
Right.
I frankly have been, this has been going through my head, and it's been very hard to make the choice. I don't, I said for years I couldn't vote for Biden, and the same applied to Harris, sweet and nice as she is, as well as seems. Still, her position, has she taken it only for pragmatic reasons to get votes? I don't know, but it doesn't seem likely that she's been really standing up for a ceasefire either in Palestine or in the Ukraine.
Yes,
I
I would
think
agree with that. Yeah, and just
in
given no
either way,
indication.
it's going to take pressure, and we had a very good meeting we had a good meeting in Berlin, or at the beginning of the month, for peace. By the way, with this Sarah Wagenknecht
Mhm.
and many others from all over Germany. It wasn't quite as big as we'd hoped, but it was about 40,000 maybe, which is an awful lot of people at the Brandenburg Gate.
Mhm.
And the victories which her party, which is a controversial party because the old Linke party, the left party, which she broke away from, seems possibly to be returning to its old fighting positions, which she hoped for, which she left because she had deserted them. It
Mhm.
seems that they may be learning from their terrible blunders, which almost send them into oblivion. Maybe, but in any case, her party won a lot of votes in East Germany, especially in these three state elections. And many think it's because an awful lot of Germans, and especially East Germans, they don't want war either. They don't want conflict. They want peace. And add to that they're very dissatisfied with the present government, which has gotten to make things even worse, and which just can't even agree with it themselves. They're fighting themselves. And the opposition, the so-called Christian Democrats, they're worse even. So that people are looking for new solutions. Some of them have found them in this right-wing party, unfortunately. Some in the left wing.
Mhm.
And one big blended terrible tragedy is a lot of them have been fooled into thinking that the main culprits for a lot of their problems are the foreign people coming into Germany, the immigrants and the refugees. And there's been an awful lot of hate propaganda against them in recent months, worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Except for that old left party, which has said no, what I think is the correct stand. Anybody who's here, no matter where they come from, what country, whether it's from Somalia or from Afghanistan or from Mexico or Venezuela, wherever they come from, if they're here, they're part of our people, our working people, and we fight for their rights along with the rights of everybody else. But this is not easy to tell to people
Right.
who tend to think, we're Germans, we should come first, or we're Americans, we should come first. That's in people's hearts so deep that it's hard to make them see that I'm an American, but I'm no kin to somebody like uh, uh, Bezos, for example.
Right. Think about that.
They're not my buddies. My buddies are rather working people, not only in America but in Germany or in Gaza or in Congo or in China. Those are if good, honest working people. Those are my allies, and not the wealthy. There's a bunch of about 200 of them now, billionaires, who own half the world.
Mhm.
Half the world's wealth is in their hands, and they obviously want the whole. They want the other half too,
They do
and
appear
they
to want it,
control
yes.
almost every field that you look at, whether it's seeds for planting, or whether it's poultry, or whether it's car making, or whether it's like amenities, mental things, or whether it's newspapers. You've got control down to 3, 4, 5, 6 companies who have basic control, and they want more. And I think these are the main problems in the world today because they're the ones responsible for climate going down the drain.
Mhm.
They're the ones responsible for these wars, basically, I think, because they want to expand. They're the ones responsible for the pressure of the racists and the hate mongers. So I think they're the main pressure, no matter what country they come from.
Hear, hear. Well, Victor, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. I thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and I hope we can continue the conversation in the future. It'd be my pleasure and honor to have you back on the program if you can make some time.
Can I put in another plug
Sure.
for my that book, Crossing the River, is still good, I think, but it's somewhat older now.
Mhm.
But since then, I've written another book called A Socialist Defector from Harvard to Karl Marx LA. And that is still available. And I think I'm sort of happy that I wrote the book. I think it said what I want to say about about East Germany, GDR,
Mhm.
and Germany today, and also about USA today, and in general. So that if anybody's interested, I recommend this book. And people have told me what I hoped. It's good reading. I put in a lot of jokes, also a lot of East German jokes, because there were lots and lots and lots of them. But by the way, I didn't talk about all the problems in East Germany. That's another session.
Right.
There were plenty,
Right. We
but
should talk about that in a subsequent
in my
episode.
book
Yeah.
there are some. It's readable, so I recommend it, and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Victor. You know what I'll do, Victor? I'm going to take links to your both of those books, and I will put them in the description to the video when we post this on our YouTube channel.
Wonderful.
So people will be able to find them easily. Thank you again so much, Victor. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
All the best. Take care.